Garrett lay on the edge of the shattered dome, his hand clutched tightly to that of his apprentice. He felt the sharp pain and heard the loud pops coming from his arm. But still, he refused to let her go. He looked down into the eerie blue glow of the pit below him. It was too obscure and hazy to see anything, save for Erin's face. Stark terror within her vivid blue eyes. Those eyes seemed to be begging him to save her, even more than they had 12 years ago.
Just hold on. I'll pull you out.
He roared fiercely through the howling wind and stinging rain. Erin was crying out through her own pain. Desperation the only thing that kept her from falling to her death.
Garrett! Garrett, I'm slipping. I can't hold on much longer.
She cried again.
Give me the claw.
She groped at the sides of the rooftop, snagging her palms on the broken glass as she fought to climb to safety. Garrett summoned all of his strength and threw himself towards her handmade tool, that accursed claw that she had been bragging about all night. That damned thing was the reason why they were in this mess, and yet she was relying on it to save her life now. The thief heaved as hard as he could, in the direction of the wayward object. With one final sickening pop, he felt his shoulder dislocate. The thief clenched his teeth in pain. But then, in an instant, the rest of the dome gave way, and Garrett found himself falling alongside his student. He would never forget what happened next. That gut-wrenching moment. Unrelenting tribulation tore through him, as Garrett felt her hand escape his. Garrett jumped up in bed, screaming. Guinevere bolted upright, her gentle caress coming to his aid. She and Pilfer were both with him now, back in the clock tower.
What is it? Are we under attack or something?
She inquired, looking around anxiously. The thief regained himself, although he still sat in a pool of fear and sweat.
Nothing. Go back to sleep.
He tried to comfort her, but Guinevere knew better. She looked him dead in the eyes.
You suffer from chronic nightmares, don't you?
She asked with an air of certainty. Garrett stared at her through the darkness, watching as the candle flickers illuminated her rich red locks. She knew. There was no way that she could know. Maybe the young woman had just assumed the worst. When he neglected to answer, she decided not to press the matter. Instead, Guinevere cupped her hand to his brow and wiped some of the sweat away from his hair and eyes.
If you ever want to talk about them, I'm here.
She smiled solemnly. Garrett watched as she nestled back down into the bed.
Guinevere?
He nudged her. Guinevere rolled over and smiled up at him again.
Yes, Garrett?
He stared at her through the dim light. Only the candles and her own vivid green eyes produced any source of luminosity. He had never been good with women. He never had any reason to be. Relationships were pointless in his line of work. Loved ones were just a liability, a leverage that his enemies could use against him, should the need ever arise. Garrett had never needed anyone before. But right now, he desperately needed Guinevere. The thief looked down at the intricate stitching laced over his comforter, eyes unblinking.
Garrett?
She inquired. Silence.
Yes.
His voice made her jump. She turned to him, his eyes still affixed on the mattress.
Yes, what?
Guinevere earnestly awaited his next words. The thief looked into her eyes.
I do suffer from nightmares. For almost a year now.
Guinevere gawped at him. There was something in his eyes. Something old, yet very new. He stared back at her, and before the young woman could answer, he spoke in a strange, sad tone.
There was an incident 1 year ago. I was at the North Crest Manor with...
He stopped.
With...
Guinevere asked, curious. The thief sighed heavily.
Aaron.
Who's Erin?
Guinevere sat up in the bed.
Was she another student of yours?
She was much more than that. She was...
There was a long pause, and Garrett squeezed his throbbing temples.
She was like a daughter to me. She was the only family I've ever had.
He spoke solemnly.
What happened to her?
Many years ago, I was a keeper. I already told you about that. When they found me, I was just a kid. A man named Artemis took me into the order. After I attempted to swipe his coin purse, apparently sneaking up on a keeper was supposed to be difficult, but I never had any trouble.
He scoffed.
Long story short, some insanity happened. Before I knew it, I was the only one left.
Garrett lovingly withdrew his glove from his left hand. Guinevere's eyes widened at the small, faded key-shaped scar. He watched her eyes dazzle and grinned.
Why haven't I noticed it before?
Probably because I rarely take my gloves off. I don't like to be reminded of certain happenings.
You take them off when we...
It was dark then.
He quickly added.
About a week later, a girl tried to pickpocket me on the edge of town. I still remember how tiny her hands were as I grabbed her wrist away. That unrelenting fear in her blue eyes.
He paused, the memory bittersweet.
Was that...
Yes.
So you took her in, the way the keepers did for you?
Yes.
Garrett lowered his voice whilst rubbing his exposed hand. Guinevere continued to listen, and then asked the fateful question.
Garrett? What happened to her?
I never cared much for family ties, or legacies. It was always about keeping myself alive, until the end. Aaron changed all of that. I'm not sure why I did it, why I chose to help her that day, but I did. I decided that she would be the one, my apprentice. She showed so much promise, and you should have seen the way she hung on my every word. With every trial, every test, I could see it in her eyes. She idolized me. She wanted to impress me, but as she got older, she began to change. It wasn't enough for her anymore to learn from me. She wanted to be me.
What do you mean?
Guinevere encouraged.
She began to ignore me more and more, until she became unruly. She started taking more and more risks, strictly to try and show me up. Eventually, it started costing me. By the time she was 16, it became glaringly obvious that she was completely out of my control. She robbed my landlord, and she got caught. I was able to convince him not to report it, but it came at a high price. My apartment.
So that's why you live up in this clock tower.
Guinevere commented sympathetically. The thief was silent for the longest time, and for a moment, she feared that he would not continue. Then, he finally spoke.
That was it. I told her that she couldn't stay with me anymore, unless she agreed to listen. She just laughed, and that was the last I saw of her for a while. She came back to me one night, saying that she got in some serious trouble. Big surprise.
He smirked weakly.
I was beyond words when she told me that she had been working as a harlot at the House of Blossoms. Apparently she hadn't lasted more than a week before refusing a rather prominent client. I'm not sure whether it was what she had done or what unspeakable things she had been through out on her own like that. But whatever the case, I knew that my apprentice was gone. Yet, in spite of that...
He paused again, and Guinevere was shocked to see a tear welling up in his eye. If ever there was one person whom she never expected to cry, it was Garrett.
To this day, I still don't know how it happened. I can't really tell you what was going through her head that night. All I can remember is that she fell.
The thief stopped abruptly and turned his gaze to the rafters overhead. That solitary tear raced past his cheek and landed with a silent drip upon the wooden floorboards.
When I first met you, it wasn't your past that I despised, Guinevere. It was the thought of having to open myself to someone like that again. I've always equated feelings with getting into trouble, but over the years, I've learned that they can do far worse than that.
He fell silent. Guinevere didn't know what to say. What could she possibly say to such a tale? What could she possibly say to comfort the deep pain that her thief was going through at that moment?
Garrett, I don't know what happened that night. I wasn't there. But I know it wasn't your fault.
She spoke softly. Garrett's eyes flew open in spontaneous ire.
Yeah? How in the hell would you know?
He hissed. Bravely, Guinevere puffed out her chest.
Because, Garrett, if you loved that girl even half as much as you say, then I know that you would never do anything to endanger her. You would never endanger someone you care about.
The thief gaped in shock at her wise words. Guinevere's body relaxed into deep and earnest sympathy. Tears of passion streamed across her cheeks. Garrett was very still, and then he pressed himself into her passionately. There was no force or domination, or even control. It was a free and raw emotion. He pressed his lips into hers, his hands running down the length of her form. He broke away, his mouth hot and panting. Guinevere's body shuddered, her skin erupting with goose flesh. The thief slid his hands up under the small of her back, then rocked back to his knees, bringing her up with him. Guinevere knelt on his lap, her mind once again a willing prisoner within the confines of that prosthetic right eye.
Forgive me, my Guinevere.
All right.
She agreed, more or less aware of what she was saying. She was still lost within him.
I am going to resume your training this evening. Only this time, you aren't just another job I'm taking to make some coin or favor a friend. This time, I genuinely want to help you. I want you to become my apprentice.
Guinevere didn't answer him. She didn't have to. The way she kissed him was all the acceptance he required. Garrett continued to hold her close to his beating heart. A sparse smile contorted across his lips. In that instant, Guinevere had become more than his lover. She had become his future. A future worth protecting with his very life. When he was with Guinevere, the aching memory seemed to all but fade into nothing more than a dull pain. And there was something else too. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in so long that he barely recognized it. It was hope.